Good morning, everybody. Trying to go on with politics from being locked in. I thank you all for your time. And we want to talk about two wars today. One, we are fighting all over the world at the moment. This is the COVID-19. And the other war still is going on in Ukraine, against Ukraine in the Donbas. And they do have a certain connection. So we are going to talk about that within our RADA program. And I thank the Foreign Ministry of Germany that gives us the possibility to link, although we are locked in at the moment. And I want to give the word to our partner in Ukraine, in Kiev, which is Victor, for a second. Hello, Victor.
Hello, Marie-Louise. Good morning, everybody. I really hope that you are staying in a good health and strong spirit. I just wanted to welcome you all on behalf of the project, which is called Ukraine in Europe, #Ukraine in Europe. This project is implemented by Center for Liberal Modernity in partnership with East Europe Foundation and in close cooperation with the USAID RADA program. And this project is funded by German Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The main objective of this project is to bring Ukrainian professionals, decision makers, MPs and their ADs, Ukrainian parliament closer to decision-making centers in Europe like Brussels and Berlin. We would like to establish close ties and show best practices of decision-making in terms of European integration to Ukrainian parliamentarians and Ukrainian policymakers, and to build close ties between them. And
Okay,
we would like, we would like Ukrainian voice to be heard in Berlin and Europe. That's why we are conducting this discussions. Follow us on Ukraine in Europe # in Facebook. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Victor. And some more technical remarks. There is a simultaneous translation into Ukrainian, and you will be able to find it under the Korean flag because we did not want to put you under the Russian flag. Also, you can follow us via Facebook if the Zoom room is locked in with 100 viewers, and you can put questions in the same format, which we will talk about and get in later. So, the Donbas. Every country is fighting their own war, and there is regions where we don't talk about, which we seem to forget. And we have a member in the Center for Liberal Modernity who has been working on the Donbas and in the Donbas for a long time. And Nikolaus now is going to give us a brief idea about what is happening in this closed up region. Nikolaus?
Thank you. Thank you, Marie. Hello, everybody. I will try and be as brief as possible. I see the clock is ticking. It is 11:04. I just want to give you an update on what has been happening in the so-called People's Republics in Donetsk and Luhansk over the past month. To cut the long story short, I feel that we're going to face a very difficult situation in the near future. Both regions, both territories, areas comprise a population that is unique to the world, probably because it's the most overaged population that you can think of. Almost 50%, almost half of the population are of pension age. And this is probably a world record. And therefore, almost 50% of the population are in the risk age to contract seriously with the coronavirus infection, which is a very bad place to start with. The second point is that the health system there is, of course, in a very bad state. From the onset 2014 of the war, there have been very little significant investments. And the big problem, of course, is that the wages and the general situation, economic situation in those areas is very bad. And therefore, a lot of out-migration has been going on since. So there is a lack of doctors and medical staff. The coronavirus infection has arrived there officially in late March. From I think the 28th or the 29th, we had the first case reported in the Luhansk areas, non-government controlled areas. And a few days later, Donetsk also had cases. Today we have officially 6 cases in the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, and we have another 4 cases, I think, officially in the Luhansk People's Republic. We cannot say really whether this is, of course, we cannot say whether this is true or false. We don't have any other information than what the separatist de facto officials give us. But the fact that they have said that, for instance, in Donetsk, they say they have more than 10,000 people. If you, I think I must correct myself, maybe even 100,000 people under self-isolation, under quarantine, then the potential cases are already very, very high. And the big problem that we have here is, apart from what I've just said, is that throughout the month of March, no particular safety measures, precautionary measures have been taken by the de facto authorities. The Donetsk people were a bit faster. They began to introduce border closures and some restrictions to public life in the mid of March, but in Luhansk, absolutely no restrictions were introduced until the very end of March. So we have a lockdown in both Luhansk and Donetsk 2 to 4 weeks later than Ukraine, and also 2 weeks later than in Russia. From what we know from other countries, of course, especially the US and Britain, which have had late reactions of the government to this crisis, we can expect that the price that will be paid in terms of cases and in terms of fatalities can be rather high. So thank you very much. I think that is all I want to say for the beginning.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nikolaus. I think we all are, to a certain extent, specialists in this pandemic now, and we know that elderly people are those who risk the most not to survive, and so you don't need much fantasy. Also knowing if you lock up too late and if you don't prepare for testing and so on, there will be a big catastrophe. And maybe I can add that for 4 weeks, when the first people died, it was supposed to be a swine flu, and we all know that this can't be true. So in the back of this catastrophe, one of the catastrophes we have in this world at the moment, geopolitics is going on. And we have a president in Ukraine who promised in his campaign that he will bring peace. So the expectations on him are very high. And one of the ideas that now came up was that there might be a new format for Minsk, adding to Minsk, which might be a consultative body which brings in the separatists and the Ukrainians in a format of their own besides Minsk. In the back of this new idea, I would like to ask our guests, which is Ivana Klimbush, member of the Rada from European Solidarity and chairperson of the EU integration, which is Alexander Mereshko, also member of the Rada, belonging to the Servant of the People, chairperson of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and from the German Parliament, Roderich Kiesewetter, Christian Democrat, member of a Foreign Affairs Committee, and Manuel Sarrazin, member of Parliament belonging to the Green Party and also member of the Foreign Committee. In the end, I will have Maria Solkina, being a political analyst, giving her view of how it is debated also within different NGOs in Ukraine. Thank you all for giving us your time. Ivana, I know that you are waiting at a gas station, and please give us an idea about your perspective on this peace process. Is it moving? What ideas do we need? What is your idea about the new format?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, Marie-Louise, I really wanted to thank everybody who has gathered this meeting and who is devoting their energy, time, and intellectual effort to follow what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on with this serious geopolitical conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and Russia and the Western world as we see it. Because this seems to be in the pandemic, and when we are dealing with the most acute problems for health in many countries, in all of our countries that we here represent, obviously this problem is kind of being muted, and this problem is seemingly going off the agenda, both in Ukrainian media, which is also very sad, and but as well in the political agenda of our partners that have been, serving good cause of bringing back the international law by pushing and by restraining Russia with their sanctions, which we are grateful for. So therefore, I'm happy that we have the possibility to discuss today what's going on and what we think about this supposedly new format that was initiated on the 11th of March within a Minsk group. It should have been the establishment of the new consultative advisory council that would include, and here I would like to also straighten up the terminology. Not the representatives, as Nicholas was saying, not the representatives of, LPR or DPR. These are so-called republics. They do not function really on their own. These are puppet authorities that are functioning under the full control of the Russian Federation and Kremlin itself. And so we have to understand and have to be straight about terminology. I am happy that civil society in Ukraine and different political forces in Ukraine have been very vocal about unacceptability of this council to be established the way as it was initiated, as it was announced. And I think the very serious thing that we have learned is that any kind of shadow agreement, because it probably came from some shadow previous agreements with between Ukraine and Russia that have been going on, has to be actually supported by the Ukrainian consensus, by the Ukrainian public and political class as well, and has to be confirmed by Kyiv. And we see that if something is not supported in Kyiv, that gets a serious resistance of both the civil society and also by the different political forces. And that's what happened. And I'm very happy that finally Ukrainian authorities have both heard internal civil society and then political opposition political forces, but also have finally listened to our partners. As far as I understand, our partners in Normandy format, neither Germany nor France have been informed about this initiative of signing this preliminary agreement of establishment of the advisory body. My understanding is that Russia has actually put a lot of effort in making sure that this is happening, and something that has been initially shown to us by the Ukrainian authorities as something insufficient and not really, and rather declarative, has been fiercely hoped for by the Russian Federation. So we see this by the hysterical comments, by very angry comments from the Russian MFA when the process of signing didn't go through. I think this was a kind of a culmination of the current efforts of the new authorities in Ukraine to follow their understanding of the peaceful efforts that they were probably most sincerely trying to reach with the Russian Federation. But I think there is a growing understanding also in the Ukrainian political class that finally Russian Federation has a very strict agenda that does not foresee national interests of Ukraine, that does not foresee Ukrainian sovereignty within that does not foresee Ukrainian progress in European and Euro-Atlantic aspirations of Ukraine. And all of this is definitely creating the necessity to kind of reassess the approach that was used by the Ukrainian authorities up till now. I think there are quite a few lessons that have to be learned, but I hope that maybe I'll be able to join in the discussion and provide you with some more comments.
Okay, thank you, Ivana. Maybe for those listening to us, there has not been a signature yet under this idea. It has been postponed, maybe not only due to Corona, but due to the political debate within Ukraine. And Alexander, you are representing the party is carrying the government of President Zelensky, but what we heard, there is different opinions and ideas and judgments on this new idea, and maybe you can tell us what's going on and serve it on the people. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to express my personal point of view, because I would like from the outset to start that I'm here in my personal capacity. So I'm expressing my personal views. First of all, as a specialist on international law. Well, the first issue is about responsibility, because what we have right now in Donbas, it's a humanitarian catastrophe. And this humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding before our eyes, and it's deteriorating. And from legal, or to be more precise, from international legal point of view, the matter is simple. According to the Hague Convention, according to the Geneva Convention of 1949, who is responsible for everything what's going on in the occupied territory? The occupying power, the occupying state, which is, in this case, is Russia. So Russia is totally responsible for everything what's going on in the occupied territories. Another point is that we should keep in our minds the fact that what we have here is war. It's not local or civil conflict, civil war. It's war between two parties, between Russia and between Ukraine. It's aggressive war. And regarding consultative council, this is an interesting theoretical issue, because this issue is surrounded by lots of myths and a little bit of hysteria, I would say. And the matter is also simple, because we should start by reading the text of the Minsk agreements. And in the second Minsk agreements, at least thrice, we have mention of consultations with the representatives of the so-called separate districts of Donetsk and Luhansk. For example, in case of holding elections. So this is a requirement of the Minsk agreements, which is political document. It's not international treaty, but still we have some political commitments under this document. And in order to so to speak, institutionalize the idea was to create this consultative council in order to hold consultations between, I stress this, between Ukrainian authorities on the, representatives of Ukraine and representatives of the so-called separate districts of Donetsk and Luhansk. So we should understand here a very important point that when we are talking about separate districts under Ukrainian law, we understand it as a territory temporarily occupied by Russia. It's not the so-called People's Republic of Donetsk or People's Republic of Luhansk. These things are different. So the idea was to start such kind of consultations with participation of those people who live in the occupied territories, not with the representatives of occupying power. And for this reason, there is no direct negotiations between Ukraine and so-called People's Republic of Donetsk and People's Republic of Luhansk. We have direct negotiations only between Ukraine and between Russia. And it's very logical because we have war between Russia and between Ukraine. So, and we can have only negotiations in this format. Another thing is that, another point is that this so-called consultative council was created within the structure of the so-called trilateral commission, trilateral group. And this is a format in which we have negotiations between Russia, Ukraine, and as a mediator, OSCE. So the creation of this consultative council doesn't change in any way this format. It continues its existence. So basically, this is my point. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. I think maybe, and we will go in deeper into it in a second round, maybe it is not such a risk as some of us think. We will go deeper into that. Roderich, you have been for a long time working on the Balkans, and there we had a situation where you had an aggressive power in the back of a war which always tried to look as if it was not part of the war, which was Serbia at that time. Maybe this historical parallel might be something which can be used as lessons learned when we now look at the Donbas. So please, can you tell us what you, your party, and maybe the Chancellor's office is thinking about this new consultative body?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I try to bring in some thoughts, and I would like also to express my gratitude to you, Marie, but also to Alexander and to Maria for the deep insights. First of all, I think that Russia is exploiting the situation into several contexts. We see that Russia is trying, as regards the Normandy format, to establish a more bilateral format between Ukraine and the separatists. So they try to hide away, to sneak away. We should not accept that. So one of the results should be that we need a closer look to the Russian behavior in the region. So on the one side, they exploit the situation, and on the other side, they give the separatists a certain leverage because they should lead the negotiations instead of the Russian part. We cannot accept that. On the other side, the next summit for the Normandy format is procrastinated, and we should not accept this procrastination of the next meeting. So we should focus on that. Second remark, as regards the OSCE on the Balkans, we never have had OSCE force. We have had NATO and European Union, but we should strengthen the role of the OSCE, the SMM, and probably on the basis of the German presidency as of 2016, we should renew our proposals of that time, which means to strengthen the role and to bring in more responsibility, and on the other side, to increase the pressure on Russia by showing them that they are hampering this organization. Then I believe that Germany has an action plan regarding Ukraine. It's a bilateral action plan in combination to other European endeavors. But in this action plan, we have a very short-term humanitarian support initiative. But we have not yet focused on the corona disease. I see two areas of engagement. One is the humanitarian situation, especially in the prisons, but also in the hospitals. I have seen, and thank you for the email, the very impressive declaration of 155 NGOs of Ukraine this morning for a stronger support on this corona disease, especially about the role of the prisons, the Russian-controlled prisons inside the Donbas. This is really hurting, and it's very touching, and it is a situation we cannot accept. So in my party, we will try to investigate together with the Foreign Office, and I'm very grateful that Manuel is also here, that we have to look on a short-term action plan, which is already active, but where we should create measures in this disaster relief situation, in this very emergency, very critical situation regarding the humanitarian situation in prisons and in hospitals. But that's the short term. In the midterm, we really have to keep the pressure on Russia that they are at the negotiation table, and that we cannot accept a role of the separatists, because this would give Russia the role as a kind of mediator in the background, which is not acceptable at all. So Russia needs to be named and shamed at the table, and we should not accept their deputies there in the region, the separatists. My last remark is about the role of the European Union. I am really concerned about the weak appearance of the European Union in this COVID situation. They came late. They came with some proposals which are very costly, but they are not supported. It is not backed by the member states so far. So the European Commission should be encouraged to not only look into this situation inside the European Union, it's a question of credibility as regards the Western Balkans, as regards Ukraine, as well as the situation in Northern Africa. But for the next steps, the European Union should be prepared to support its eastern border, especially Poland, and to support the Ukraine as one of the closest cooperation partner of Poland in this context. We need disaster relief, we need support for humanitarian relief, as well as for humanitarian aid in the situation, because otherwise the European Union would lose much more than only credibility. It would lose impact, and Russia would be the third party, which would be which would own also the social medias, and which would own also the perception of those who are critical against the European Union. So my last plea is that we need to do everything, and also the Ukrainian authorities should ask a stronger European presence, a stronger European support from the European Commission for Ukraine. Thank you so far.
Thank you very much, Roderich. Just for those who listen, Roderich was referring to a open letter of many NGOs. You can see it in Germany on the page of the Deutsch-Russischer Austausch, DRA, and it is referring to unbelievable situation in the prisons in this now locked up area. It's really hurting your heart thinking about what is happening to people there. So Manuel, Roderich said there is the possibility that Russia tries to sneak away from its responsibility. I want to take you in. Is it that we are too critical, too a little hysteric about this consultative body, or how do you judge it?
Yeah, so I mean, I learned from you, Marie, actually, that all bad forecasts of the last 10 years regarding Russia all came true. So from being an optimist, I learned it's regarding Russia always better to be a pessimist first and then try to be positively surprised, which is usually never happening. But besides this ironic form, I think it's a clear signal of Mr. Zelensky that he's searching for another power base of his rule, and that he needs to show up that he can have a direct and successful dialogue with Russia to bring something like peace. I think we will not see as functioning because I don't see the Kremlin having a huge interest in giving a real peace which Zelensky would politically survive in Kiev. But I think this is the signal there. The second point is that I see in the West, especially in Germany, that this debate on the so-called People's Republic are not directly led by Moscow is increasing. I have heard several statements by our foreign ministry and also by our foreign minister, which were referring towards that the Russian influence on the so-called de facto authorities in Donetsk and Lugansk should be more strong to make them not making so many ceasefire violations. What I really think is totally naive, or if it's not naive, it is with a certain political aim. And I think this is really dangerous because I think we really let the Russians go away with the story that all the bad things are done by those guys down there and all the good things are brought by Putin. Regarding Corona, I think there's a quite decisive point in what you said and also in what Nikolaus said, and also what Alexander said. I mean, there are two options actually. The one option is that the fight against Corona will be much better in Ukraine, and the people in the so-called in the occupied areas will see that the health situation in government-controlled areas is much better, and this will weaken the support within the population in these areas. But there's also another option. The other option is that Moscow is playing the same thing like they played with Serbia or with Italy in Donetsk and Lugansk, and they're showing off that the crisis management over there with the big strong brother in the back is better than in Ukraine itself, and it might be manifesting the choice of especially the elderly people in these areas. I think this is totally open. I have actually no idea about the epidemic situation in Donetsk and Lugansk, and I'm not a virologist, but I think it's totally open how this game will end. Last point, we also don't know absolutely what will be this Putin's game regarding the Putin after Putin coup after Corona. So I think there's also high question marks about the future policy decisions in Russia, and also which circles around the Kremlin will become strengthened in this crisis. I think there's not an option that there will be any circles become strengthened to have a real positive new Ukrainian policy, but it might be that circles might get much stronger who are in favor of an even much worse Ukraine policy by Russia, and we should be prepared also to that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Emmanuel. Not very optimistic, and even if you say that you are not a virologist, but we all know, of course, there's a lot of things we don't know about Corona, but one thing we know, the old people are, as a group, the people who will be affected by it most. And like Nicholas showed us, with a population being old like it is in the Donbas and so many doctors having left, we can know that there will be a catastrophe and many, many people losing their lives under really very, very hard circumstances. So this, I think, we can know, although we don't know enough about Corona yet. Maria Solkina, you are a political analyst. Please give us a few words. Again, is it being hysteric about this consultative body? Is the Zelensky presidency naive? What is Yermak, Mr. Yermak? What kind of role is he playing when he is dealing with Cossack? Please come in with a little judgment on it.
Hello, one more time to everybody. I think that one of the most important risks when we speak about the current state of affairs in the Minsk agreements and with the attempts to push the negotiations forward is to underestimate such new initiatives as a consultative body, which is called which is proposed to be called consultative council. So the main problem here is that these initiatives, though being formally advisory, will have number of long-term after effects, both for Minsk process and for general policy of Ukraine tackling Russia in the framework of this conflict. And I will explain why actually and what are actually those hidden or sometimes obvious risks and warnings we should pay attention to. So first of all, this is not just a consultative body, because if we will look to the documents proposed for signing on the March 11th, we will find out that this so-to-say consultative body should start development, not only consultancy or some advisory activities, but development of some political and legal proposals regarding political part of the Minsk agreements. And all of those people who were at least at the law level, at least, penetrated into the whole logic of Minsk agreements, they will tell you that very soon this body will become the main platform, the main platform for any political talks regarding political part of the Minsk agreements. Not the political group within the Minsk agreement where we have Russia, Ukraine, and OSCE, but instead of that, that platform where we will have like two sides, Ukraine and representatives of and Russia will make everything in order to push the main part of political talks within this format. At least the risk of this is really high, and I don't understand as of now how it will be actually omitted by the Ukrainian side if this format will be agreed. Another action is about like direct dialogue. Yes, of course, we have some representatives of self-proclaimed republics as invited side within the Minsk process. But at the same time, this consultancy body will be the very first format with concrete procedures of its formation and composition, of standards of its work, where we will have those guys. And the argument about the civil society representatives is actually not a constructive at all, in my expert opinion, because if we will look, for instance, not to Ukrainian experts also, or to some others experts' opinion, but for instance to the Freedom House report for 2019, we will find the conclusion that at the present moment there is no one independent, non-governmental movement, organization, or any other body in the occupied areas, both in Donetsk and in Lugansk regions. All of them who claim to be non-governmental are fully controlled by self-proclaimed republics. And we can, of course, make a very simple prognosis that DPR and LPR and Russia will never allow people who will be not controlled by them, or who will not represent the idea proposed by Russia or by these separatist formations, to be sent as delegates, as representatives of those areas to consultative body. So anyone who has at least some kind of another position regarding political development of the situation will never be sent by DPR and LPR to this consultative body. And this is very simple conclusion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Maria. I think that was very clear. You wanted to have one more aspect?
Yes, I have a lot of, but we can...
No, please, I'm sorry. We are in a format.
We'll continue, yes.
Corona is fighting us to be short. So if maybe I give you one more minute and you pick out the one most important you think.
Yes, I'm pretty...
For you.
I think that there is also the high risk that the general logic of the Minsk negotiations will be slowly changed according to actually the new status of Russia, which it will acquire in this group as an observer. And I'm pretty sure that the next step of Russia will be some changes in the security group under the Minsk agreement. I think that it is very probable that Russia will propose to have the same direct consultations and dialogue, not only under the political group, but also under security group regarding, for instance, disengagement of forces or disarmament or any other ceasefire issues. And also international risk, because they are long-term one, but some kind of domestication of the conflict will have after effects, not only for international support for Ukraine, but also from legal point of view for international court, for international trials, which Ukraine have in international courts.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria. I want to come back to you, Ivana. I think one of the main descriptions was Roderich saying it's about sneaking away. Ivana, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yes, Russia sneaking away. Now, we know each other for a long time. I think Minsk now is 5 years ago. Minsk has been decided, Minsk #2, in a situation where President Poroshenko knew that 2,000 soldiers were encircled in the Baltovo, almost a terrible situation under which the negotiations took place with Angela Merkel and France. But still, though, we all, to a certain extent, had the feeling, does Minsk really help? Does it bring relief? Does it have the potential for positive steps, or are there positive steps? So maybe I give you the chance to look back a little bit, and then we would again ask, if we were stuck for such a long time with this Minsk, don't we have to look for new ideas, which could be ideas and steps that really would give the peace process a little push? Or is that the wrong time to talk about it, taking into account this war #1 or #2 we were talking about, which is this terrible situation in a locked up Donbas?
Well, thank you, Marie-Louise. Let me just react to a couple of things that have been mentioned by the colleagues before I answer your question. First, we see that Russia is using right now the situation with coronavirus to enhance its propaganda in the Western world. For example, I'm sure that everybody has noticed how Russia says that it provides humanitarian aid, for example, to the United States, and then it turns out that the United States is buying that so-called aid, or that it also provides some humanitarian aid to Italy, and then it turns out that its military intelligence of Russian Federation is launched across Italy to actually get more information. However, that all plays to that image that Russia wants to present itself, and the same thing is also happening here on the territory of Ukraine, where Russia is seen as aggressor and is an active aggressor against Ukraine, but where it also tries to present itself as an observer. And I'm very saddened by the fact that our Ukrainian representatives of the Ukrainian authorities, like the head of the office of the president of Ukraine, has bought into that, on that hook, basically, that Russia has suggested by proposing to legitimize the representatives of these so-called republics and make Russia an observer in the same status as Germany or France. I think this is total nonsense, and I think that we are not overplaying it when we are raising our voices with concern with regard to this consultative body. Moreover, I would like to remind everyone somehow we are forgetting this, that Russia has started active passportization on the territories of the occupied territories. And according to Russian information, 200,000 people in 2019 on the occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions have received, basically by push from the Russian Federation, Russian passports, and Russia expects that 800,000 more, which makes it to the million, will receive those passports in 2020. So my question is, what kind of representatives of who, with which passports, are going to be there in that consultative advisory council, whatever that is going to be? So there are big question marks. With regard to Minsk, obviously we know very well what the, incredibly difficult situation it was when Minsk was signed, and none of us was, applauding for the Minsk in the format it was signed, had to be dealt with, and that was the best we could get with our partners, with President Hollande and with Chancellor Merkel at that point when President Poroshenko was conducting these negotiations with Putin, with their support. However, we have to remember that all the democratic world has actually linked all of its pressure efforts with regard to Russia, all of its sanctions, to Minsk agreements. I think, it's not that Ukraine itself can suggest, can propose new format and agree it with the Russian Federation. We need a buy-in from our partners. And therefore, I think that Ukraine's unilateral actions with the Russian Federation only are playing against Ukraine. And so all of our actions have to be done, even if we are thinking of, new formats, additional instruments, additional mechanisms. It has to be pre-agreed and done in coordination with our partners. Otherwise, we will not be successful. Otherwise, Putin will definitely use this opportunity for himself and overplay Ukraine and overplay the free world, because they are exploiting, the democratic processes we have in the countries, the democratic procedures, openness, vocality of the civil society, vocality of different political forces, to their own benefit. And then therefore, this is very important that everything that we are suggesting in terms of actions that we have to do in the future is coordinated with our partners. And one more thing that I think is very important, unfortunately, the initiatives of the Ukrainian authorities have dropped the logic that has been already pre-agreed between France, Germany, the US, Ukraine, EU, earlier, when we were stressing that security should come first, and only after that we can go into any political discussions and finding political solutions. However, right now it seems that Russia is pushing everybody, and Ukraine sometimes, bites into those hooks, that somehow political agenda should be coming forward. I have to be very sincere with all of you, with myself, with all of you, that if we mechanically return the occupied territories right now, we will not be able to immediately find a political solution on that and have the political elections there. We have to first and foremost concentrate on mental return of those territories, on information return of those territories, on making sure that people that have lived there 6 years in fear with the Stockholm syndrome, under pressure, under propaganda, they have the time to kind of unwind. They have the time to accept different information, and only after that we can go to political solutions. So I think security first, humanitarian issues alongside, but only then through mental return, we could go to political solutions.
Thank you very much, Ivana. Alexander, you claimed that you want to give us your personal view, which I respect very much. But on the other side also, is Alexander in? Can you listen to me? I still see Ivana.
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Alexander. Alexander, the last summit we had fixed very concrete steps that the partners would meet again if there was severe steps haven't taken place in questions of security and really disarm the troops and pour them apart at certain points between the Donbas and the free non-occupied Ukraine. So I think if the summit takes itself serious at the moment, what we see now, it's not only due to Corona that it couldn't take place, it's due to what they fixed when they were last meeting. But talking about Ukraine and talking about EU and Germany and France, and I will ask Roderich and Manuel also later on, is it possible that there is not enough trust in the government Zelensky that France and Germany will, or EU will really stick to them? Might that be a idea? I think what we want from you, even if you have a personal different opinion, we want to understand a little bit the logic which is behind that decision, which is irritating, like you know, not only a lot of people within Ukraine, but I think is irritating the international partners also.
What do you mean by trust? By trust?
Well, yes. Is it that you? I mean, of course, you know, when living in Ukraine, you know the debate which we all have within our countries, that sanctions are either hurting our own economy, that they don't have, that they don't really hurt Russia, that it doesn't make any sense to go on with this way. So the debate about lifting the sanctions was, well, I would say to a certain extent being suppressed by some strong voices within EU. But if I was sitting in the Ukrainian government, I would be a little nervous about this development within the EU, for example.
Yeah, of course, we're very nervous when we hear any hints regarding the possible lifting of sanctions. And remember what President of France, Macron, said. He said that sanctions don't work, and that's why we need to have a dialogue with Russia. And of course, it was a matter of serious concern. Because
yes, that was the Munich Security Conference. I remember him saying that. Yeah,
exactly. And we're really concerned about this. And the thing is that our government is fighting very hard to leave the sanctions in place and to prevent European countries from lifting sanctions. I understand that nowadays the members of the EU are also in difficult economic situations, and they have to think about development of their economy. And of course, some politicians, not all of them, but some politicians and decision makers in the European countries, they would like to lift sanctions against Russia and to have business as usual. And we understand that it might be in the interests of their people who are voting for them, but it's not in the interest of the international legal order. It's a matter of principle. Because what happened in Ukraine, in Crimea, it was a total collapse of international legal order in Europe. It's something unthinkable what happened since the times of the Second World War. And that's why I'm absolutely positive that the sanctions should be kept. And I also believe that sanctions should be intensified if Russia doesn't stick to its commitments under the Minsk agreements. And by the way, there are also some politicians in Ukraine who say that Ukraine should leave Minsk agreements. But the thing is that we might pay a very high price for that, because many sanctions by the EU are linked to the Minsk agreements. And if we leave this format, these sanctions can also be lifted. And there is a great danger in this. And of course, we understand that actually Ukraine, we have to build this coalition with our Western partners. I completely agree with my colleagues that we need to coordinate, or at least to take into account advices of our Western partners. First of all, the US and Germany and France. But we should have mutual trust. It's also important. Remember what Reagan once said, trust but verify. So, but I also believe in trust, in mutual trust. And I hope that sanctions will not be lifted.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Roderick, you used the word which will be, I think, the topic of this little talk, which is about sneaking away. And if we all understand that Russia is with a very sophisticated propaganda machine, even more so, working in times of Corona, they are on Twitter in the West, and Ivana already mentioned those unbelievable actions demonstrating like something help towards the United States, where we know that their own people don't get the help they need, especially in the regions. Sneaking away. Let's talk about the possibility of EU sneaking away, or Germany and France sneaking away. And Alexander just mentioned President Macron's speech in the Munich Security Conference, when he said, and he really did so, he said, well, the sanctions don't work, but still we will stick to them, which of course was giving really a pretty much of nervousness to the Ukrainian side. So what is about the so-called West sneaking away and trust, which Alexander was talking about?
It's a very good question, Marie, and I would like to support what Alexander just has mentioned about trust as a mutual question, or as a mutual position. Because we have heard and listened very carefully to Mr. Macron when he mentioned that we need a new position towards Russia. And he combined that with some criticism at NATO, and he asked for a more European independence, European strategic autonomy towards the United States. And on the other side, we have counter sanctions of the United States against some European countries regarding, for example, Nord Stream 2 and so on. So the West is in a really weak position, and he has brought itself into this weak position. And therefore, I believe that we need a firm consideration or reconsideration of our own purposes, of our own aims. What do I mean? First of all, I think that we have to better advertise our sanctions, because they are targeted against persons and organizations and not against the Russian people. And we have to make very clear that these sanctions are against politicians and oligarchs, about 150 personnel, about 40 to 50 organizations. And the counter sanctions by Russia are directed against our society, against agriculture, against industry, and so on. But we have learned in the last 5 years that Russia has a very resilient industry, has a very resilient economy, and is well, exploiting the situation by psychological means, by hybrid warfare as well. So if we want to stick to our position that we support Ukraine, we should do this independent from a Ukrainian government. I think that it was a mistake to to issue the telephone conversation between Zelensky and Trump, but we should not be affected by that. We should really stick to the conditions of the Normandy format, of Minsk 1 and 2, and try to be firm. And as regards the French and German position, I think the Chancellor is very smart and wise not to deviate from this course of keeping the sanctions. And Macron, we need to understand the situation. He is heading an organization which is called En Marche, what means they need this movement. He needs to win the hearts and minds of this movement, because this is not very strongly anchored in his society. It's a new party, it's a new movement, it's a weak parliament. Assemblée Nationale has not such an impact as the Congress or as the House of Parliament or as the German Bundestag. So the strong position of the president is very dependent whether he is still in the minds of his population, and if he is able to get his movement keeping mobile. So it's a weak position which the French president has originally. It's a weak position because he is lacking support, and he was elected to avoid a right-wing President Le Pen. So he's not, the population is not convinced by him. So he needs always new proposals. And it is very populist, the very populist movement in France, to try to change the image of Russia, or to try to mitigate the deficiencies of the relationship to Russia. But I think it's a German responsibility to remind also the Western European partners that the origin of this disaster is not Ukraine. The origin of this disaster is the decision of Putin to exploit the weakness of the West. And instead of having pursued the American approach to arm the Ukraine, we have started a very difficult, but I think also successful approach by strengthening the civil society, by non-violent means, and by sanctioning Russia instead of arming Ukraine. That's a more or less indirect method, but it is keeping the peace, and it needs also on the Ukrainian side a better understanding of the Western approach. And that means strengthen the structures, strengthen democracy, strengthen control inside the country, fight corruption, fight organized crime, and try to win the hearts and minds of the Ukrainian population. I know this is very difficult due to the economic situation, but, and as you asked it, and I would like to be short now, as you mentioned it, the position of the European Union is too much focused on internal problems. And we are losing our credibility, not only in the MENA region, or in Syria, or in Greece. We are losing our credibility in the Ukrainian population, from the perspective of the Ukrainian population. Therefore, we need really a task force, either to strengthen the OSCE again. I think this might not be feasible in short term. But on the other side, we need a special program or a kind of envoy that we advertise the Minsk agreement, and that we strengthen those structures inside the Ukraine, which are fostering the position against Russia. That means negotiation only with Russia and not with the separatists. And second, to name and shame and blame the deteriorated situation in the occupied territories. So we really need to exploit now, vice versa, the really worsened situation in Luhansk and Donetsk. So that's also a question of strategic communications, but it is more it's also an investment in the credibility of the European Union.
Thank you, Roderich. I know that you are a person who is really fighting for principles.
I try to.
Before I give the word to Manuel, please help me for a moment. Ivana told us that she will go on driving after an hour is over. Has she left? And if she's still there, I at least would like to say her a goodbye and a big thank you and a big hug, and please stay healthy. Ivana?
All of you stay healthy. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Bye-bye, my dear.
Thank you, and hope to see you after quarantine.
Yes, thank you very much. Go on, my dear. Okay, thank you very much. This was number one. Number two is now, before I hand over to Manuel, Roderich was talking about envoys. I think, dear Roderich, there are so many envoys at the moment. I don't know whether it's really a convincing idea to send another one. But this staying firm, Manuel, now you are opposition, you can be even more outspoken than our friend Roderich is. From what I understand, there has not been a sign from the German and French government that this consultative body will not be accepted. And number two, talking about Macron and his motives, with him actually being weak, having Le Pen in the back. Maybe it will interest and some of Ukrainians that we see that the right-wing parties are strongly working together with the separatists in Crimea, Donbas, and supporting Russian interests. Maybe that is interesting. And then all you people who have been listening and watching so patiently, then we will start with your questions. Manuel.
So thank you. So first, let me answer on this French question first, because it's more easy to formulate for me. I think it was a tactical move from Macron for internal policy, giving in not only to Le Pen, but also to the Republicans. And this is a general problem we see. But it's also showing that for people like Macron or Eastern German prime ministers of the Länder, this is only a topic for internal use and not a topic for diplomacy or geopolitics. And this is a weakness of France, of course. I mean, geopolitics is important. But also, let's say it that way, the French approach seems to be some kind of new Gaullism approach in a kind of together with Russia and against US. We will see how after Corona this is. Situation might be totally different because Corona is a catalyst for Chinese influence in our neighborhood. We cannot suggest now, but in general, it's a bad sign that Macron's morality was so fast changed due to internal reasons. And we remember when he had Putin in Versailles and made strong statements against him. So this is actually a bad signal. Sorry, the post is just coming. So that's why I'm
Do you have to open the door?
No. I'm outside already. So
okay.
Second point on this question of trust. Let's say it that way. I think this consultative body was a surprise for Berlin and not a strong signal of trust from the Zelensky administration, especially from Mr. Yermak, to them. On the other hand, I think the reason for this policy shift of Zelensky is a lack of trust in us and a lack of trust in the US. I think when Zelensky started, he had the option he had the impression, you remember this phone call tapes, for example, the Europeans are not delivering, Americans are delivering. And the Hunter Biden debate changed that totally. And now I think that Zelensky seems to explore two options. The one is Moscow and the other one is interest groups from the Southeast East Ukraine who have been before 2014 closely linked with Moscow. Since 2014, not so closely anymore, but still are more exposed to Russian interests, let's say it that way, as a power option for his future. And I think that's clearly a statement towards us that they don't trust in us anymore and prefer to check out what's possible with Moscow or with those former proxies who were opting for Ukraine in 2014 due to other reasons than morality.
Thank you, Manuel. Yes, it is always can make you sick when you see how the West is playing into Kremlin's hands. Talking about Mr. Trump and us not really being as united as we should be on the question of Ukraine. Now, where is our guests coming in? Please.
Yes, Privit and welcome from my side. I'm Mattia. I'm also with Center for Liberal Modernity, and I have the privilege to transfer your questions to the podium. So thank you for everyone listening on Zoom and the various Facebook channels. There were several questions reaching us, so I will focus on those which I've selected. There was one regarding a global ceasefire or a suggestion by the General Secretary of the United Nations to have an immediate ceasefire. So is that an option for Ukraine? Is it something viable? That was a question. Another question came from Alexandra via Facebook, possibly to you, Alexander, but also to the other panelists. It is about what is civil society and what are Ukrainian authorities able and willing to do to help those in the occupied territory. So what instruments are there, and can the EU possibly have a role in this process too? And a third last question, and then we can return to the panel, is a question also from Facebook, beyond Corona. If we think about the civilians trapped in the occupied territory, how can we improve their lives beyond Corona? So are there, what specific plans are there in the pipeline regarding maybe opening border points or allowing more trade? So maybe there are specific suggestions in the pipeline which you could share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. So I hand over to Alexander first. Are you back in, Alexander?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
the question regarding, if I'm not mistaken, I will repeat the question to see whether I understand it correctly. The question was about what Ukraine can do to mitigate or to improve humanitarian situation in Donbas,
well,
or civil society.
Yes, it was two questions. One was about the general ceasefire, which was demanded by UN, which of course would be wonderful for a lot of people who are living in territories where fighting is going on while the virus is running around this world.
Yes, yes. Well, of course, our priority, I would even say top priority for Ukraine right now is to stop bloodshed. And it's extremely important because when we hear on the news almost each day about our servicemen or civilians being killed, I think it's a great tragedy. Each person who was killed at the front line is a great loss, a great tragedy for the whole Ukraine. And Ukrainian government is trying to do, and our army is trying to do its best in order to prevent this bloodshed and stop fire, because our servicemen, they only respond to the fire started by Russian troops or Russian troops in disguise. Yeah.
May I interrupt you for a second, just for short information? We learned that the corona epidemic is already being used by the separatists, not letting OSCE observers in anymore. So they obviously misuse this situation already in order to hide that fighting and aggressiveness is still going on. Okay.
That's true. I also was going to mention the fact that unfortunately humanitarian NGOs like Red Cross are also not allowed right now into the occupied territories. And for this reason, Ukraine and NGOs, international NGOs, so to speak, they cannot do much to help people suffering in the occupied territories, because unfortunately these territories are not under our control and we have no influence. So I think that it's hard to imagine what can be done by the Ukrainian government under the circumstances when we have no access to these territories and to our people in the occupied territories.
Thank you. Part of the tragedy also, what we learn is that those pensioners who had to pass over into the territory, the government territory, at the moment can't go and get their pensions anymore because there is a lockdown from all those parts where there was the possibility to pass. So it's doubling. It's not only about the lack of money, it's together with this crisis. And we know and we learned that not acting very decisive, but trying to sneak away and talking about swine flus, or like we had in Brazil and in other parts, even in the United States, that you don't have to take it so serious. In the end, cost a lot of lives from people. And this International Red Cross not being able to get into the prisons where Corona has already started, I mean, this is really a crime against international law. So anybody else who wants to step in with the questions Mattia was reading to us? Roderich Manuel? I don't see them at the moment, so Mattia, maybe you go on.
Excuse me, Maria and Nicolas wanting to jump in, sorry.
Okay.
If I may, just to
yes, Maria, go ahead.
Comment a little bit about the situation with pensioners, which you just mentioned a minute ago. So just for our audience to understand that if the pensioners from the occupied territories cannot leave the occupied areas right now and to withdraw their pensions from Ukraine and the government-controlled territories, it doesn't automatically mean some kind of famine on the occupied territories, because people, not everybody know that the people on the retirement, they receive this, so to say, the second pension on the occupied territories from Russia. It is not called a pension. It is called some kind of, social payment coming from the brother nation, or how Russia call it in its propaganda, or how separatist channels presented. But it is just to understand that people will not be left just without any means for their actually living. But yes, the border, or not the border, but the division line is closed. And just also to understand that Ukrainian authorities allow in certain cases to cross the division line from our side. It is some individual cases when you prove somehow that you really have the urgent need to visit occupied territories. For instance, you have elderly parents there, for instance. But as the practice of last 10 days shows, that even if our servants allow people to cross our checkpoints, they are returned by the separatists, because they do not allow people even registered there to enter the occupied territories. And Ukraine has taken care about those people, trying to find some place to spend nights and to feed them close to the division line, in the close to the checkpoints.
Thank you, Maria. Mattia, will you?
Nicolas wanted to jump in as well.
Oh, Nicolas, go ahead. Yes, please.
Yes, sorry, I had to switch my computer. Is the audio okay?
Yes, we see you now by all your beauty.
I just wanted
Nikolaus.
to put in 2 points. One is the OSCE. That's right. They have been barred from crossing the contact line, but that don't mean that they have been barred from entry into the non-government controlled territories. They are there. And also they have the headquarters in Donetsk and Luhansk. And from last Friday, I think the separatists have eased this restriction, and now they are, at least the Minsk Trilateral Contact Group is meeting as we speak on video as well. And I think they are going to find a solution. That's
Nikolaus, may I get, before you go to step number 2, can you tell us whether there is a somehow clear picture, whether both sides are fighting against each other in a conflict like you very often hear, also in Germany, or can OSCE mark whether the aggressiveness is different coming from the so-called separatist side or the regular army of Ukraine?
You mean the ceasefire violations?
Yes, yes.
Well, there's a long established practice by the OSCE to monitor and record ceasefire violations. And you can read that in their daily reports, which are published daily on the internet. The OSCE has a practice of not blaming. That is because of the OSCE being the OSCE. But this is, of course, the only condition under which the OSCE is allowed to operate on both sides of the contact line. And I think it's in the interest of both Ukraine and the international community to continue the OSCE to operate as it does.
Yes, but it's about facts and figures.
Exactly. You can read the OSCE reports. You can read the OSCE reports, and they will give you an idea of who fired first and where the fire came from, the direction. And it won't say in the text the direction was from the occupied territories or from where the Ukrainian army positions are. It will say northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, and you will then have to open a map and draw your own conclusion.
Can you draw a conclusion then, Nikolaus? Can you draw a conclusion from what they say?
Well, I would have to draw a conclusion every day, and I frankly, I don't do that. I just see that I see that the ceasefire violations continue, and of course, I understand that the separatists, the Russian-controlled side, they have a much bigger interest in keeping the ceasefire violations up, because that's their raison d'etre. They exist in where they are as a sort of defense force against Ukrainian aggression. And only this makes their being as a so-called People's Republic viable. That's a totally different matter. I don't want to open this discussion.
Okay, then number 2.
Say one quick thing about the Red Cross. It is not right to say that the Red Cross has been denied entry. Also, the International Committee of the Red Cross is the biggest international organization that has permanently been working and continues to work inside the non-government controlled areas. And the staff in Donetsk from the International Red Cross is up to 100 people. This is bigger than the OSCE mission. These are not all foreigners, they are locals, but there is a small group of foreigners of international staff who are leading the team. And just last week, I think Thursday or Friday, a large convoy with humanitarian aid was delivered from Kiev to Donetsk through the contact line with the officially allowed in by the so-called People's Republics.
Thank you very much, Nikolaus. It's always very, very necessary to really stick to the facts. Can you please give for a minute, no, for 10 seconds, tell us, does the Red Cross get entry to the prisons? Do you know that?
I know that, I think they don't. I know that the issue with prisons has been delegated to the OSCE, and there is a special ambassador, Toni Frisch, who is an ambassador of Switzerland, and his task is to visit the prisons on the non-government control, on both sides actually. And he does that in the format of the trilateral contact group.
Thank you very much. Back to Mattia, I think, for the last chance for 1 or 2 questions, and then we will wrap it up.
Right, very quickly, there were 3 more questions I want to mention, and also to bring in maybe the German audience again, the German speakers. There was a question about the local elections. There was much talk about under which circumstances local elections can be held, so maybe you can share your perspective on that. Another question regarding civil society participation in Minsk. We were talking a lot about this consultative body, but is there a role for civil society of Ukraine in the peace talks? Last question to Mr. Mereshko. Referring to Mr. Kiesewetters' argument, is there a risk, and how do you evaluate the risk of Russia becoming an observer rather than the aggressor through the formats we have discussed today, the consultative body? So these are the 3 questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthias. So I will start with Alexander, I think. It's again a little bit about Russia sneaking away. I think that will be the topic of the day. Alexander?
Well, basically, it's one of the myths spread with regard to the attempt to create this consultative council. Russia will never become an observer, and it's not an observer right now. It will not become because, first of all, this is war, I repeat it again, this is a war between Russia and Ukraine. And Russia, for this very simple reason, logically, will never become an observer. Secondly, this consultative council is supposed to be created within the framework of trilateral group. Trilateral meaning Russia, Ukraine, and the OSCE. So, and for this simple, it's not logical to argue that Russia becomes an observer. And the political, this council is supposed to consist of the representatives of civic society, including the occupied territories. So, and there is no direct talks, or it doesn't provide status of observer to Russia in any way. It's impossible. It's just impossible legally, politically, and in fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. I think then Roderich.
Yeah, very brief.
Yeah.
Very brief. Yeah.
Very brief.
I think we should hamper by all means that Russia further attempts to frame the international perception to sneak out. And it's really an advantage of the Russian political strategy to give the impression that they are not part of the problem, that they are commenting it, that they are installing others and trying to implement Ukraine as a sacrifice and also as an actor in the region, whereas Russia gives the impression that if others would follow their proposals, all would be in a better shape. So also as regards the contact group and other issues, it's our task also as parliamentarians to really help not Russia to frame the situation, but to give the truth a space. That's all I would like to say. And my last concern really is we need to strengthen the role of the European Union. We are losing credibility, and it's not able only for France and for Germany to keep the Normandy format as a strong actor if we were not able to be backed by the whole European Union.
Thank you, Roderich. Manuel.
Yeah, so the question regarding the local elections, let me be quite frank. I cannot imagine to see free and fair elections in the so-called People's Republics, especially not under Ukrainian law, with anything what are the current circumstances. And I cannot imagine that Mr. Putin will allow people in Donetsk or Lugansk to have more free elections than those in St. Petersburg or Moscow. And I don't see that we can accept elections, even those like St. Petersburg or Moscow, taking place there as a free ones. and all security measures are not even in this argument, but the security measures are decisive. I cannot see how you can organize security for elections as long as the border is not controlled by Ukraine. This is not to the wording of Minsk, but let me give just a simple argument. If you have demobilized and demilitarized and de-weaponized all troops standing in Donetsk, for example, on Saturday before the election day, 12 o'clock in the night, who is telling you that not in the morning over the open border, new ones will come and that you will have de facto the election day under weapons? Yeah, so you need to control the border by Ukraine or by an international capacity, which is doing it on behalf of Ukraine. But on the other hand, I cannot imagine that Putin has the strength to give the border guards back to Ukraine. Never again, because that would kill the personal contact between those refugees going from the region to Russia, who have quite open contact today and have open border, by having Ukrainian border guards again there. So I don't see a realistic chance for a good local elections taking place. But I see a chance for taking a bad elections place. So where all these criteria are dismissed and the international observing out here is actually pressed for giving a stamp on as free and fair, although it is not really. This is a
unfortunately,
danger I see. Yeah.
Dear Manuel, yes, being somebody who has been in politics for 40 years now, I have to admit I have seen a situation when OSCE was pressed very hard to declare elections fair and free, which in fact were not. Everybody who has been listening to us, first I want to thank the parliamentarians and Maria, who joined us. I want to thank our partner in Ukraine. We are working under more difficult situation now, but still we can talk to each other. I think what is most important at the moment is really the humanitarian situation in Donbas. We have to bring it back. Roderich, Manuel, I'm looking at you. I hope you will bring it back into German parliament. Of course, everybody will saying now we have Corona and this is our main task. At the moment, we don't have time for anything else. This is maybe the danger we are running in, that EU will be so busy with itself, handling the crisis, and after the crisis is over, that they will feel that they don't have any strength anymore to look into Ukraine and what is going on there. We are here that we don't forget this war still going on in the middle of Europe. We want to keep the Donbas in mind. And I thank everybody who was taking part, preparing it, giving us their time and their thoughts. I hope to see you all healthy again, and you out there stay healthy and safe and have a nice Easter. Thank you. Bye-bye.